Hello and welcome everyone. We're just going to wait for everyone to start joining. Make sure everybody's here. Why don't you, if you can see the chat function, you can use that to let us know where you're joining in from. We'd love to see.
Good to see the room filling up already, Polly.
Yeah, exactly. So do let us know where you're all coming from. I'm based just outside of London in the UK. We've got Lucy, who I'll be introducing later. Oh, look, here we go. Eva's in Amsterdam. Alita Anthony's in Rochester, University of Rochester, New York, USA. We've got Daniela from Islamabad. That's fantastic.
Great
Coventry.
Lots
London.
of diversity.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, wow, that got loads of people now. St Mary's in Twickenham. That's just down the road from me. I'm going to just go through a few housekeeping points while we're waiting. So we're in webinar format, which means we can't hear or see you, which is why we're using the chat. When we come to our Q&A session, we'd really love you to use the chat feature to send us your questions and comments. And if you'd rather speak rather than use the chat, you can use the raise hand function. And Courtney, who's our session administrator today, will unmute you and you'll be able to speak. And just as a word of warning, your camera may turn on if you do that. So just in case you're in your pajamas, just letting you know that might happen. And we are going to be recording, we are now recording the webinar. So we'll be sending that out within the next few days. So we're delighted to be holding this webinar in partnership with the University of Kent. We're going to be talking today about how relevant cultural intelligence, and in fact, I'm going to say now we call cultural intelligence CQ for short. So you're going to be hearing a lot about this term CQ. So how relevant CQ and our certification program is for people working in a very wide range of roles in the education sector, in the university environment. You know, you might be a member of faculty, you might be working in some other form of professional service or administration. This webinar is for you, and we really hope you'll find it beneficial. So some quick introductions. I'm Polly Collingridge, and I am the account manager at the Cultural Intelligence Centre UK. I'm also a CQ Certified Facilitator myself, and I am honoured to introduce our panellists. First up, Lucy Butters, joining us, as I said, from Glasgow in Scotland. She is our Master Facilitator at the Cultural Intelligence Centre, a specialist in CQ, and has been working as one of our primary facilitators for several years. She's also about to become a CQ Fellow, which is an elite certification programme to develop capacity for thought leadership in the field of CQ. And Lucy founded her company LMB back in 2010 to support international ambition and inclusion, working primarily with universities in the UK. So she's got tons of experience working in that sector with CQ. She's also worked for the British Council in international cultural relations roles linked with developing and implementing strategy to support the international ambitions of universities in Scotland. So welcome, Lucy. And then we have Dr. Anthony Manning, who is the Dean for Global and Lifelong Learning at the University of Kent, which is in the southeast of the UK in England. Anthony is responsible for the development, implementation and review of global and lifelong learning activity, which includes the internationalisation of the curriculum, pathways to higher education and online learning. Anthony's also a Principal Fellow of Advance HE and a National Teaching Fellow. He has a doctorate in applied linguistics and has lived and worked in 5 countries, including France, Germany, China, and Japan. And finally, Seb Cadeno, also from the University of Kent, Head of International Programmes. This includes the office responsible for international student experience. And he's the convener of Kent's Global Officer Leadership Development Programme. And he's lived and worked in Australia, France, and the UK. So lots of international experience between everyone. Anthony, I wonder if you could first just tell us, please, how did you first get involved with CQ?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, pleased to say I've been involved with CQ for quite a while now, and the way in which we encountered it and embraced it is really through the development of our internationalisation at home activity. So the support and co-creation of activities on campus that foster intercultural communications between our home and international students. We run a range of activities at Kent that look into that. One of them, which is our flagship activity in that area, is called the GOLD programme. I love an acronym. So GOLD stands for the Global Officers Leadership Development Programme. And we were really looking for a mechanism to help the participants in that, who are our domestic and international students, in working together and learning from each other effectively and developing leadership skills. And when we were exploring how to do that, we found CQ, which now acts really as a golden thread through that provision to help steer students through learning opportunities and developmental experiences while they're studying on that course, which is a co-curricular course and a credit-bearing option, depending on what the students have in terms of time in their timetables. And it allows us to help the students identify areas of development linked to their own cultural intelligence and build on their understanding of other frameworks such as EQ, for example. So we were familiar with EQ, and we can help them understand CQ in the context of emotional intelligence, or EQ, as well as IQ, which I think many people have been familiar with in advance of understanding what CQ or cultural intelligence is. And the reason why CQ was appealing in that space really is, having looked at a range of different theories and intercultural awareness frameworks, like Milton Bennett's development model for intercultural sensitivity, or DMIS, or the Hofstede cultural dimensions theory, CQ really stood out as an opportunity for development and focus for our students in a way that we felt we could embed meaningfully in the co-curricular and formal curriculum side of things. So that's how we encountered and kind of have embraced CQ so far in what we have done.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm wondering whether this might be the point, Lucy, at which you could perhaps explain to people who aren't familiar with CQ what it is, because we keep talking about it, and there may be people on this call kind of wanting to get back to basics, so perhaps you could do that for us.
Thank you, Polly. And what I would like to do, I know I can't see any of you, but I'd like you to join me in an activity, and then just to maybe write in chat how that was for you. So very simple. I'd just like, wherever you are, for you to cross your arms and then just recross them, but with the other arm on top. Just take a moment for that. And if you could type in chat, how did that feel for you? Once you've taken your arms apart to get them back into the odd, not natural, awkward, uncomfortable. Oh, and this is difficult. And I'm quite sure that amongst you, there's someone who's a perfect yogi who found that perfectly. They have body symmetry. But yeah, it's weird, it's odd, or you're having to think about it quite a bit. And that is the reality of doing things slightly out of our norms, out of our comfort zones. And in universities, we invite students to fly across oceans to come and join us. We have staff joining from different corners of the world, and we have people that have trained their way of thinking in very different disciplines. So that way around how the engineers cope with the English lit, cope with the scientists, they all think about problems differently. We are in very complex organizations when we're in universities. And the question then, how do we work well with all those layers of cultural diversity? And rather than have the fight or flight syndrome, lean into that feeling of discomfort and decide to do well. And in the year 2000, two academics, Sunang, who was and still is at Nanyang Technical University in Singapore, where I had the great pleasure of going out to meet that team of academics. There's now 9 there in this field. And Christopher Early, who's then at London Business School, posed the research question as to what makes individuals and organizations successful who work across cultures and those that maybe struggle or fail. And what they found is that there are 4 capabilities that are consistently high with individuals and organizations who are very effective at relating and working across diversity, across cultures. And culture shows up as everything. We can be talking at national, we can be talking at team, because as soon as we get into groups, we start to establish culture. And so just as Anthony was saying about those different intelligences, the IQ, the EQ, the CQ, in the 1960s, I think it was people like Sternberg and Detterman who said, well, if you can only have IQ, you can only use your cognition, are you really intelligent? What about your motivation to use it? What about your ability to use it? And of course, emotional intelligence is the most well-known of these multifaceted intelligences. But CQ sits in there. That's a theoretical framework that it sits in. And for a university, I think it's really important that there are now over 2 decades is what I was going to say, 2 decades of research as to what it is and testing its validity and its impact. So for me, just like Anthony, I've been involved with all sorts of different intercultural training. The British Council was great when I was there, and I always came away with facets that just captured me, but I never had a framework. And cultural intelligence gives us a framework, and since developing it, it is absolutely my tool of choice, my approach of choice when I'm working to enhance effectiveness with people working across cultures.
Thank you, Lucy. That's really great and hopefully provided an overview for everybody. Anthony, I don't know if you could tell us a bit more about what you hope to get from more in-depth CQ training and certification.
Sure. So until this point, I've been using, open source resources, and I had my own CQ assessed through a self-assessment process, also through the Cultural Intelligence Centre. But what I'm hoping to do to gaining a deeper training experience is really unlocking the power of the international community that we're surrounded by and leveraging the tools associated with that training to help others with that same endeavor. I'm constantly struck in my work about the great resource we have within the diverse community on a university campus, but you can apply that same logic to an international organization or any community of practice. And similarly struck by the fact that just by being in proximity or in association with a wide network of individuals does not mean that people are effectively communicating or interacting, and that something else has to happen, and ongoing keen focus on strategies for collaboration and good working activities need to be embraced in order to help people get the best out of that situation in different ways for their own different purposes and local needs. So I hope in my context that getting a better CQ understanding through this training will unlock that power to help the students that I work with in developing and leveraging their employability skills for future use, for collaborating in face-to-face and digital environments when they're on campus with us, or in collaborative online international learning context, COIL context, or in the future when they're working with people from diverse backgrounds, either in the same office building or across networks of organizations that are associated, in other countries through digital mechanisms. And I think CQ offers that opportunity, but I feel constantly like I'm looking at it on a surface level. And so I think this training will help me elevate my practice. And then I hope, obviously, it will help me share what I've learned with that community for their own benefit, to help people understand their strengths and weaknesses and build confidence in having international encounters, helping people to prepare and have a strategic intent that is well placed and well researched before going into those encounters, and just generally raising awareness, I suppose, about how CQ can help us get better outcomes from the international networks and communities that we're part of.
That's great, thanks, Anthony. I'm thinking it might be helpful now, Seb, if you can sort of focus in on the classroom a little bit, because I think you were going to tell us how CQ can help there in your view with achieving those all-important graduate attributes and just supporting the kind of internationalized student experience.
Yeah, thank you, Polly. So in the classroom, we try to focus a lot in the different courses I'm involved in on 3 key graduate attributes that certainly we've got listed at Kent, which are critical reflection, confidence, and that global and cultural awareness. So I feel like the global and cultural awareness is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, understanding your own context and others' contexts and being able to have a framework for that is hugely useful. But there's also a real element of critical reflection in carrying out CQ and thinking about our own practices, others' practices, etc. And then building that confidence in our students to be ready, as Anthony's just mentioned, to go out into the world, whether that's through a virtual mobility piece and COIL, or whether it might be a short summer school or an entire year abroad. Trying to build that confidence in our students is really important for us. So I think from my perspective, having that certification and delving deeper into it gives me the ability to then pass on some of that understanding and knowledge, or deeper understanding and knowledge, to students, and really introduce them to CQ fully, ensuring they've got that framework, say as part of GOLD that we've mentioned, our Global Officer Leadership Development course, and as part of a few other courses at Kent, we get the students to build a global passport, which is essentially a kind of reflective self-assessment piece based on some of the CQ attributes, to review their own progress in this space, and to build that global and cultural awareness. And giving them that very clear framework is super helpful for the students. I always love the sessions where we do it. It brings up a lot of discussion. I could probably leave my students, chat away for 2 hours on a lot of the elements around CQ, because it's personal. So normally we're able, even if we don't fully like it all the time, we're able to talk about ourselves or our thoughts quite easily, and then listen to others and ask them questions. And so we have a nice diverse classroom, a lot of UK students in those classrooms, also often with different cultural contexts and maybe sometimes, as Lucy mentioned earlier, just different ways of looking at things because they're engineers or they're artists, etc. And they're able to use that. So the discussions we get out of it are really helpful. And it often just confirms what they already know. And I think the students enjoy that, feeling like they've got a framework, they actually know where they're at, they know what to improve on, that gives them a goal, it drives them towards that. And I think that is just hugely beneficial for the students. And as I say, always a really fun session to do with students and to get some ideas out of them. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ev. Lucy, you've been working with CQ in the education sector for around 10 years, I think. It'd be really great if you could talk a little bit more about your experiences there and how CQ training and certification sort of practically helps with the objectives that Seb's been talking about.
Thank you, Polly. Yes, I think one of the key areas is, just as Seb said, around student learning and development, and he'd mentioned graduate attributes. Often university work now is teamwork. You're looking at assessing in teams, and these can be quite complex teams, for example, or it's multidisciplinary. So it's a really useful way of layering in development, and if more people use the framework, there's lots of opportunities for students really to kind of embody it and understand it. So student learning, and worked with all manner of different courses, from business MBAs to museum studies, who are looking at cultures they can no longer access, for example. So how do they go about that? Scientists. So there's lots of opportunity there. And of course, the other side, the enhancing the teaching and learning. I'm aware I've worked sometimes across departmental, for example, working with a psychology department once, and we did a few sessions with them. And one of the reflections from one of the academics was that they'd always used this kind of questionnaire at the start as a kind of icebreaker, and they've always viewed the questions as right or wrong. But since looking at it through a perspective of culture, they've realized that actually it was different, and that she still used the exercise, but it was a much more full and rich conversation without the judgment. It was more about, where would this work, where would it not? So it totally opened a different way of thinking. And still in the UK, many of the perspectives that we have developed come from the West. So there's opportunities for how we think about things differently, and how we foster aspects like inclusion in an international classroom, for example. There's also the researching. And again, there's lots of different ways from thinking. I've supported, for example, international mentoring partnerships for researchers, through to things like supporting female voice in early year researchers. So there's different issues going on, and we're talking about people. So developing work that uses cultural intelligence as an approach really impacts, it has real use. Developing leaders, part of leadership development, and increasingly supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion is a real part. And for me, there's a real crossover with the international and the EDI work, which is often in silos in universities. And I see cultural intelligence as a real opportunity to bring the two together in many aspects. In the States, I'm aware that the university sector is the largest sector for the Cultural Intelligence Centre in terms of who is using cultural intelligence. We're not at that point in the UK. I would love to be thinking that it's something, because I just see positives in it for people developing in this space and sharing it, in terms of how we build our effectiveness. And there's so much is shifting all the time, internationalisation, globalisation, the words kind of change, but now it's very much about impacting and empowering other partners. You know, the landscape keeps changing. So I see huge potential for us developing cultural intelligence for the sector in the UK. And I would maybe ask Seb I would maybe ask Polly to pick up on that about what people would expect from doing a certification with yourselves, for the people who have joined.
So we're talking about, you know, what the day looks like what is it? How long is it? What do you learn? That kind of thing. So you, the certification program lasts for a day and a half. And in a nutshell, you learn all about the CQ framework. You learn how to administer and debrief our assessments. So there are two kinds of assessments. Your regular self-assessment, which takes around 15 minutes, and then we have a 360 version of that assessment, which involves you doing your own self-assessment and then also asking a minimum, I think it is, of 3 other observers to rate you on your current level of cultural intelligence. So the certification is based around learning how to understand the framework and how to administer and debrief these assessments, with the goal to incorporate CQ into your own training and basically also learn how to start building a framework to develop CQ in your organization. Anthony, sorry, you raised your hand.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on something that Lucy was saying earlier as well, in terms of obviously the staff benefits, particularly at universities at the moment. I think we're seeing an increased interest in developing a coaching culture across the institution, and I'm someone who's currently involved in that. I'm lucky enough to be part of an apprenticeship at the moment that is developing skills in coaching professional, and I'm finding that actually CQ is coming into that quite a lot for me, in terms of how we guide people in having positive interaction. So I think, as well as the key focus on student development that we've mentioned, it shouldn't be overlooked the fact that this approach through CQ can really have a positive influence on how we improve interactions within a diverse workplace for staff, whether that's in a university context or a broader context. And I think what's interesting about it also is that it's an area that, with your CQ, you're never going to be perfect at it, and you're never going to stop having opportunities to engage with it, to improve. So it's a real lifelong learning commitment and opportunity to be involved with. When I look at my own CQ from a test that I did through the Cultural Intelligence Centre a few years ago, I was pleased to see that I came out quite highly across the 4 different areas. But the area that I was perhaps weakest in was in the strategy area. So I'll be interested to see whether, if I do that again in the training, whether I have changed to some extent. And also for me, it was kind of understanding how much of my strategic intent or planning is kind of subconscious rather than focused, and whether I need to be more conscious in my planning and how I could do that effectively. So for me, that's the area I'm interested in focusing on, and it may well be that the other areas that I was confident in have changed in some way as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes, because there's always something to work on. And obviously the context of the pandemic and collaboration mechanisms and modes have changed. So how we deal with different contexts, as well as the people in those contexts, I think can have a key influence on how we work.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Yeah. It's so true that, you just, because you've taken your cultural intelligence assessment once does not mean you will stay the same at all. No. It's very much a kind of a moving thing, it's something that you can develop. That's the whole point of it. It's not a fixed capability. Yeah. It's very much something you want to work on and develop, and circumstances change. And the other thing that's interesting, of course, is as you compare yourself to others, as you do your assessment, your scores may differ depending on who you're comparing yourself to. So so just to get back to talking about the what do you do, like what is certification? It takes a day and a half, and you as I was saying, you learn about the assessment, but you also learn about the research behind the CQ model, kind of the history of it that Lucy alluded to a little bit, why it matters, and most importantly, you get lots of practical takeaways, sort of strategies to help yourself and others improve their level of CQ. And we also focused a lot on 10 key behavioral preferences that you may show. All of us have preferences with regard to certain types of behavior, you know, how competitive or collaborative you might be, or how direct or indirect you might be in terms of your communication style. And you know, when you have differences in these preferences in an organization, that it can cause conflict and a lot of misunderstanding, and that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about as well. So once you've finished your day and a half of the certification program, you essentially join our community of 3,000 more or less certified facilitators around the world. We've got, I think, around 200 in the UK, many of whom work in the NHS, because we do a lot of work there. And you have access to what we call the dashboard on our portal, which is full of resources. So you have a slide deck, you've got training materials, sample reports, articles, videos, and a kind of 200-page tome, a manual, which is how to debrief the assessments, and just, you know, answers a lot of questions. But we're also around at the Cultural Intelligence Centre to provide support, lifelong support for any kind of help, whether it's kind of logistical, like how do I use these assessments, how do I access things, that sort of thing, to more strategic help, like what do I, you know, how best might I roll out a cultural intelligence training program within my university. So we're here to help with all of that, and you get all the usual stuff like a digital badge and a certificate and all of that kind of thing. But really, we're here to help you extend cultural intelligence beyond, you know, to as many people as possible, to champion CQ within your organization, for whatever reason you're using it for. So I don't know whether hopefully that's helpful. I think SebMelt will be able to add what they've got in store in Canterbury specifically, because I'm speaking more generally about the program, but I think Seb can tell everyone what they've got in store.
Sure, thank you, Polly. So we'll be hosting the workshops at our Canterbury campus. You get a little bit of the view of the campus behind both Anthony and I on the slides, and the wonderful cathedral in the background. Monday 18th and Tuesday 19th of March 2024. We would absolutely recommend anyone coming arrives on the Saturday or Sunday to actually enjoy some of Canterbury or the local sites around Canterbury. There's easy access to pretty quaint seaside town of Whitstable and lovely market town of Faversham and other areas around Canterbury. So we'll have the full day on Monday. Obviously, don't worry, there'll be tea and coffee as you arrive, just to make sure we're all ready for the training. Lunch included on that Monday, and then a drinks reception late in that afternoon. We'll have an option of an evening meal in town, and then back to it on Tuesday morning, again with lunch, and then an optional visit of Canterbury and the Cathedral on the Tuesday afternoon for anyone who'd like to remain with us. So we'll obviously put those options out as people sign up to join us for those 2 days, and we're happy to, you know, suggest a couple of accommodation locations, etc., for people's arrival into Canterbury. Or if you're in London, you could do it by the day, probably stay overnight on the Monday, probably a bit easier, but you can make it down on the Monday morning. I'd probably stay over if you can.
I mean, that sounds great. I hope the weather's going to be as good as it is in the photo behind you. So,
it is today.
I doubt it in March, but there won't be leaves on the trees, but it will be. It could still be very beautiful. It's sunny there today. I think that might be, unless we've skipped over anything and any of the panelists want to elaborate on anything they said before, we can start asking for questions. Anthony, did you want to kind of...
I was just going to say there is a question in the chat at the moment, which is
I see. Yes. So, will there be in detail case studies or other training on how CQ trainers can take their training to the next level in implementing on our campuses, wanting to be able to support the travel costs and sustainability to our leadership? We certainly can provide case studies. Lucy, you wanted to...
Yeah, I would say that the real purpose of the certification is that people take their learning back and use it in their organisations. So it's absolutely not a case that, you know, everybody needs to be certified in order to use cultural intelligence. It's come and then take it back and see what you can do with it, if that's a useful thing, if I'm understanding the question.
I was just going to say, it comes back to the resources that you mentioned in the dashboard, doesn't it? That will help with that transferability and ongoing training and provision from the people who have access to that through the certification.
No, absolutely. We'll provide you with as much information as you feel you need that we can give you to try and support you. I don't know whether that's answered the question. Do message again if not. Does anybody else have any other questions? We've got another one here. Do you have to be a trainer or facilitator to join this training? Or who is the intended job role for this? Is it anyone with international in their remit in the university? I would say, in answer to that, Lucy, you may want to jump in. It's for anyone. They don't even have to have international in their remit. They may be working within DEI. You know, we've supported a lot of DEI initiatives, certainly in American universities. They may just want to increase engagement generally in various different areas. Lucy, I don't know if you've got more to say on that.
I would say that it's for anyone in the university sector who's thinking about how we can relate and work better. And what interested me in a recent certification that I was running in London for the Cultural Intelligence Centre, we had academics there, and since returning to their university, they've engaged people who are in EDI. So they came thinking about their research. And what they've gone away is thinking much more widely and introducing others to it. So it's for how would you use this certification is the key question. Is it useful to you?
Thanks.
Sorry, I couldn't find the raised hand, so I'm just going to jump in. One of the elements we've looked at before is staff training is not just those who are in international type roles, but actually really anyone who's frontline with groups of students. So think the library, think the finance team, think IT support, think student support. They are absolute experts in those fields. But being able to transfer that knowledge in different ways to different students from different parts of the world or the country is a real skill. And I think something like CQ can really help those colleagues. So I completely agree with Lucy. I don't think you need to be in the international scene to really be looking and considering this.
Sorry, Anthony.
I was going to say, Daniela asked a question about the training, and it seems that she's already accredited through the CQ Centre.
Yes, I see. Hi, Daniela. No, this certification isn't any different. It's more just that we are customizing it, our examples, I suppose, to the higher education sector specifically, and gathering together a group of people for whom that was relevant. So this isn't anything additional to what you've already got, but I'm glad you're here.
Maybe Daniela can share her experiences of how she's used her training. That would be great to hear more about that. We can enable the mic as well, or you can put something in the chat, Daniela, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, that would be
but
really,
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. See if there's any other questions. I don't know if there's any in the Q&A. Have a quick check. No. I was going to say something and now my mind, it escapes me. Anthony, one of the questions that I was going to ask you was, have you ever had, I mean, so far, what are the particular challenges that you may have had in getting students and staff involved?
I suppose the challenge in getting staff involved is that necessarily and importantly, there are many diversity missions all happening at the same time. And so getting people to find the time to invest in particular activities, needs to be, worked on continually by champions of different diversity missions, because actually all of those areas of diversity need their own focus. You can't bundle diversity together and expect to be able to achieve the different channels of activity effectively without focus. So that's one of my roles, and it kind of is supported through diversity allyship with the different types of diversity and the different champions for that across the institution where I work, and we can learn from each other in terms of how to support embedding different types of diversity in the curriculum or in staff development activities. So that's a kind of ongoing work in progress. And with students, it's about how you engage with the co-curricular activity, so outside formal structures, and also how you build things into formal structures, and how you realize things meaningfully, because it's feasible to build things into the architecture of learning without them necessarily making their way meaningfully into the classroom. And also, I think how you manage people's time and expectations. And it's with all of these things, it's about finding multimodal approaches. So with staff, we have informal training, we build international dimensions into the postgraduate certificate of higher education. We have regular cross-disciplinary meetings. So I would hope that CQ will help me with that challenge for students and staff of having an ongoing roadshow that has multiple dimensions to it in terms of helping people develop their skills through different forms of accessible learning and development that are attuned to their specific time availability and requirements.
Thank you. I'm seeing some more questions here.
Yeah.
What's the cost of the training? So we've discounted the training a little bit from our usual prices, and I'm going to, at the end of this, I'm going to put up links so that you can find out all of the details. It's just, I think it's just over £1,600 in UK, but I'll point you at the end of this to the links where you can register and register your interest, or just ask for more information. So we've got a couple of websites with lots of info on. Daniela, thanks for adding that you've used the CQ framework, you love it, and you've used it in both the corporate and education sectors. Got another couple of questions here. Is this intended to sit alongside existing new training plans or organisational development, or could the assessments and debrief stand alone with a view to introducing and exploring the topics to other colleagues within departments to take this forward as appropriate with their own teams or areas? Lucy, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
I think one of the discussions we often have as part of the certification is what would work best in your context. I think that phrase about in your context is what's really important. So it could be either or as a standalone, but often things get more traction if they can be embedded part of something that's already happening or ongoing, that they can be enhanced with it. So it really depends, and I often think it's around what impact you're trying to have, what audience, who are your stakeholders, all these different questions. So either or.
Yeah, I think I'd just jump in there and say that what my experience so far from talking about CQ with people in the education sector is that CQ can really provide a common language for sort of multiple disparate initiatives. So it can kind of, it can sort of feed in and support existing things going on and actually bring them together in a way that sort of feels needed. So I don't know if that helps. Daniela said, again, I'm an intercultural coach, and this framework allows me to work with clients in a very meaningful way. And then we've got a comment from Evangelia. I'm really sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I'm sure I have. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. It's already triggered some very useful critical reflection in the skills and strategies we use to approach different types of diversity in our contexts. So Anthony knows I've probably said the name wrong. I don't know if there are any other questions we'd love to answer any queries you might have.
There was one in the Q&A section, which I've
was there?
People can
Okay.
look at it. It's under the answer section, just the global passport, which I mentioned, which standard.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. So
I've put the link if
passport.
anyone's interested, or please do email me, and I'm happy to pick up on that with colleagues. Because it's locked down for our students, so there's not a huge amount on the public kind of website, but I'm happy to deal with that separately.
Someone's asking whether the assessments assist with uncomfortable conversations.
I picked up, Anthony, you talking about that. And what I find is that cultural intelligence is both a self-development tool, it's also a very useful planning tool. And I have used it as an approach or as a framework in conversations where, you've got trade union reps there that, is not at best experience, you're planning it, and things around thinking the benefit, the purpose for everyone, what we know, the strategy piece that Anthony mentioned, and then what we're going to commit to doing. I have found it a really useful framework exactly in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think understanding why people communicate in a particular way, or the fact that what people say is not necessarily what you think they mean, given that what they say may be revealing a different meaning from their perspective, is helpful in itself in terms of avoiding misunderstandings that can lead to difficult conversations, I think. And it ties in with the kind of coaching process and learning concepts in that way, I think, because I think as anybody who's worked in a big organization or with people from different backgrounds or cultural contexts will attest, it's often the case that things can flare up through misunderstandings rather than malintent. And I think definitely CQ is a useful tool to be able to process that kind of situation in a more measured and analytical way.
Absolutely. I think I'd also add that in a DEI context, at least, DEI training can be a bit of a minefield that can get people quite defensive. And I found that people find CQ as training, the sort of CQ approach as being a very inclusive way of talking about really difficult subjects, and perhaps a less of a minefield. So it can be a way in to really difficult conversations. So I don't know whether we've got any last questions or whether we might wrap it up there. I don't want to miss anything, but I think we may have come to the end of the questions. So I'd like to really thank you all, our panelists, Lucy, Anthony, and Seb, for everything, all the nuggets of information that you shared. And I really hope it's been informative and useful for everyone. And do reach out. Courtney, I don't know if you'd like to put up the final slide with all of the links in. That would be really helpful. So we'd love to talk to you more. So you can reach out. You can either email me at polly.collingridge@culturalq.co.uk or hello@culturalq. You can call me, that's my mobile number. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you want more information about the pricing and just generally anything to do with cultural intelligence, not just the certification, you can look at our website, culturalq.co.uk, if you're from the UK, or if you'd like to look at the US website, culturalq.com. We've also got a certification microsite, which has loads of FAQs about certification there, certification.culturalq.com, and of course the University of Kent website there. Which so you can check out everything about the University of Kent, and we are very grateful to for all of you for joining us, and hope it's been beneficial. So thank you.
Thank you, and we're really looking forward to actually cracking on with the training, which is coming up really quickly now. So that's
Time
really
flies.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you very much, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.